It's a common misbelief that when you start podcasting, you're not going to have enough to talk about. And that could stem from the entire production of your show, worrying about whether you're going to have enough content to build episodes week over week, or it can stem from thinking that you just don't have enough to talk about on a specific episode, whether it be solo or with a guest. Too often we get consumed with hitting some arbitrary timestamp, and therefore it throws us off our game. And in some cases, it prevents people from starting their podcast altogether. Now, if you have ever felt this type of misbelief in your world before, I'm here today to help you overcome it. And I'm going to teach you a few easy ways to make sure that you never run out of podcast content ideas. Hello, my name is Jason Sircone, and you are tuned into episode 87 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. Now, before we dive into all of that today, I want to take a quick second to remind you about my new Podcast VIP Accelerator program. This is a 2-week training program that allows us to dive into specific aspects of your podcasting strategy that you may be looking for assistance with. Maybe it's about the subject matter we're going to cover today. Maybe it's something else altogether. But it's all fair game, and to learn more about this VIP Accelerator program, simply set up a free discovery call at jasonsircone.com/discovery call. The link is in the show notes, and I look forward to talking with you about this program. Now, as I said, building content for your podcast, it's definitely not as complicated as we often make it out to be. But I feel that at some point in time, and I'm sure you felt this, if you haven't, you're probably lying to yourself and you're lying to me right now. You felt that little twinge of imposter syndrome. You've questioned whether you really are a knowledge expert on your specific area of expertise. We've all done it. And there's this self-limiting belief that sometimes we put in front of ourselves that makes us not get to that next level of breakthrough. If that next level of breakthrough happens to be starting a podcast so you can create this stage on which you can share your knowledge with the world, fearing that you won't have enough content to work with, it's a terrible reason not to get started. Throughout this episode today, I'm going to refer back to episode 84 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified, where I sat down with my friend Courtney Reimer. We came into that episode and we really didn't have a direct mindset of here's where we're going with this conversation. We knew from our past conversations, we're both podcasting strategists. We both have knowledge on various aspects of this world. And we wanted to, in essence, take 60 minutes to share as much as we possibly could. That's what that episode ended up being, was, as I labeled it when I titled it, a masterclass in podcasting strategy. And I want to bring some of those elements to this because this is a big part of said strategy. Knowing where your content is going, that's a big piece of the puzzle. And oftentimes, what happens when people start a podcast, they're doing it off of maybe someone saying, you should start a podcast. And the more they think about it, like, yeah, I should start a podcast. Or they come up with the idea themselves and say, okay, I'm going to do this podcast and we're going to see where it goes. And it's real hard to get any serious traction if that's the way you go at this. If you're trying to create a podcast just to see if it works and putting an episode or two together to see if the world shows up to listen and seeing if it really moves the needle, I'll spoil the party right now. It won't, because you have to be incredibly thoughtful about how you are going to build out your production. We live in a world where a lot of people will say that podcasting is oversaturated and there's too many people doing podcasting. I have never once believed in any of that. There are a lot of pizza places out there selling pizza. There are a lot of fast food chains out there selling fast food. It's all a question of what people are in the mood for. Today I might want McDonald's, but tomorrow I won't because I want to go to Chipotle. Whatever. There are so many options out there for us, and it's really a question of how does whatever those options are resonate with what we need. And to pull this back to podcasting, your message may be exactly what somebody needs, And they may have been on a search for the same information, the same guidance, and whoever they found to deliver it to them before simply wasn't resonating. But now you come along, and all of a sudden, what you have to say relates to them more closely. You're moving the needle. You have the keys to the kingdom. But you are going to stop yourself from bringing that message to the world simply because you think you're going to run out of things to say? It's a terrible way to look at it. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of people fall prey to those ugly statistics that we see in podcasting. People quitting after a few episodes, people not planning things out properly so they can get to that level of success that's ultimately going to sustain their show. And as that success starts to come in, it keeps them engaged in the process so they continue building upon what they started. I was on a podcast years ago, and I heard we were talking about this whole approach to content strategy and ultimately bringing a message to people that can help them move from one level to the next. And the person that was on this podcast with me, they brought up a great point talking about moving from one level to the next and realizing that whatever level you're at, you're more than likely at any point in time at least one level ahead of somebody else, and they are clamoring to get to where you are. Them getting from the level that they're at right now to where you're at right now could mean game-changing, life-changing things. But they don't know how to get there. They're still seeking that next step. And if you've got the keys to the kingdom to help them say, okay, here's what I did, here's how you can apply this to your current situation, here you go. Now you're teaching them how to make that move, and they are going to follow you because now you're showing them the light. It doesn't matter if you're on level 2 and they're on level 1, you're still ahead. And the only way that they're going to get to level 2 is if they listen to your guidance. Now they're on level 2. They can look at somebody at level 1 and say, here's how I helped, or how I was helped, and here's how I can help you. It helps everyone move to the next level. So the biggest thing to keep in mind is no matter where you're at, if you're looking to bring a podcast into the world, or if you're looking to make improvements on your current podcast, understand that you are at any point ahead of some people that are behind you, and they're looking for answers to get to a certain point. Your podcast is the vehicle that's going to help them make that move in their life. So as you build your content, there are some things that you need to do in order to keep building upon a catalog that's going to help people week over week, or maybe a couple times a week, or every other week, depending on your release schedule. What you're looking to do is create content in a way where you're always delivering something that's going to help somebody just a little bit. Not everything you put out has to be profound. Not everything has to be moving the world all the way around in a complete revolution. All you need to do is help somebody get 1% better every time they listen to you. As long as they're applying the lessons and the information that you're relaying to them, that's on them. They have to take action. But your action is to be consistent in how you deliver valuable content that ultimately helps move those people in the right direction. So if you're fearing that you're going to run out of things to talk about, I want to share a few things today. I'm going to go through 4 very easy ways to make sure that you are never going to run out of podcast content. These are strategies and these are exercises that I do in my own practices every day to make sure that I always have great information to bring to you. And it's going to make sure that content never runs out in any aspect of your marketing, be it your podcast, be it anything else that you're using to communicate with your audience. Now, we know that podcast content, it's great for repurposing, and you can use it in a number of different aspects. So hopefully you're taking advantage of that. If not, that's something that we need to talk about as well. And if you go back in the archives from when this show was called Let's Blow This Up, I have a couple episodes dedicated to content repurposing that you can check out. But to talk about the growth of everything that you're doing, and not just the growth of your catalog, but the growth of your idea catalog, which can be just as important because this is the well that you're going to continue to draw from. You want to make sure that well is continuously getting stocked with good ideas. And the strategies that I'm going to share with you today are going to help you do so. So the very first thing that you need to do, and this is cheating to some respect, but at the same time, it's not, because it's what I lean into. It's what I talk about all the time. Number one is that you need to build out your comprehensive podcast strategy first. As you know, at Bombtrack Media, I'm all about strategy first. That's what I talk about every time this show comes on, whether I say the words or not. You know, this content is built around having an effective strategy that allows you to know exactly where you're going. It's your roadmap. It's your GPS. It's going to help you get from A to B. So having a strategy of what you want your show to be all about cannot be overlooked. And it still drives me crazy to see that people say, oh yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. Let's go. And then they start recording a couple episodes and throwing that content out there, but not really looking at it for what it is on the surface, but for what it can be and for how it can grow over time the more they continue to build upon that foundation. Your strategy is that foundation. It's going to allow you to have a broad view of what your show is about, who it's supposed to impact, and how the content can be built over time. Because when I build out a strategy with someone, we're not just looking at the first few episodes. Yes, of course, we're looking at how we're going to build that in those initial episodes for a strong launch, and ultimately to have something in place that will serve as the foundation to continue building on week over week with new content. But you have to have a more long-term vision. Where do you want this podcast to be in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years? You know, you think about this from the standpoint of starting a career. Oftentimes you get asked in an interview, or even if you're starting a business and you want to build something, you're not thinking in terms of weeks. You're thinking in terms of months and more, even more so years, because you want to have something that's sustainable over the long haul. Your podcast should be no different than that. So thinking about your podcast over a 2-year period, over a 5-year period, what can you accomplish in that time? What type of message can you continue to build over that time? It's going to be incredible what you can accomplish. And I guarantee you, and I said this on episode 84 with Courtney, too often we get wrapped up in wondering what we're going to talk about this week. And this will bleed into the second reason here in a moment. But I think the biggest hang up is that folks get too concerned with not realizing that they know more than they give themselves credit for, right? Like sometimes we think we know it, but then when it comes time to talk about what we know, we don't think we can do it at least to the point where we sound like we'll have enough to say, or will my points be stunted? Because in our minds, we have to hit this arbitrary timestamp. Got to have 30 minutes of content, got to have 45 minutes of content, whatever number we've built up in our minds of where we have to get to. It's arbitrary. What's important is delivering a message that impacts the listener and impacts the viewer. Each week, one episode could be 25 to 30 minutes and be jam-packed with information, but next week you might only have 20 minutes, but be just as impactful. And that's okay. As long as you're not doing something to where like one episode is 3 minutes and then the next episode is 2 hours and you're so all over the map that people don't know which is, well, okay, well, what am I getting this week? Am I going to get a short little reel type of podcast episode, or am I getting a dissertation? But your strategy and plotting that out is going to allow you to understand how to build content within those confines. Say you want to shoot for 30 to 40 minute episodes. Okay, in 30 to 40 minutes, how do I want to structure my content? And you can start thinking about how you're going to build those things out. Now, this is going a little deeper than I want for this point, but the strategy is going to allow you to have a more long-term vision of where your podcast can go. And if you start thinking about it on that level, that's going to set you up to always have success with having enough content in the bank. And the next 3 things I'm going to lay out for you are going to speak to that strategy. But it all starts there. It all starts with understanding why having this clear vision of what your podcast is meant to be and who it's meant to serve, that's going to put you on a path to grow and thrive, ultimately getting you where you want to be, setting up monetization possibilities, bringing in new people to your audience, having people recommend your content, it becomes much easier to do these things if you have a clear vision of how to get there. Number 2, do not worry about those arbitrary timestamps and let your recordings roll. Now, as I said a moment ago, timestamps, completely arbitrary. Do not worry about trying to hit a certain mark. This isn't Domino's. This isn't 30 minutes or less or 30 minutes or more and it's free. Man, am I dating myself? Anyway, when you think about this, I know in our minds we think we have to have something that's of a certain length in order to hold the audience. But think about your own consumption habits. Do you not like it when something is a little bit shorter and it delivers the message that you need to hear in that moment? When we're consuming content and we're looking for impact, we're trying to solve a problem. Maybe we just want to be entertained for 20 minutes, whatever the case may be. When we are consuming content, very rarely are we looking at the clock to see if it hits a certain mark. I can't remember any point in my life where I watched something that really resonated with me. But then when it got done, I looked at it and said, well, that would have been much better if it was 30 minutes instead of 25. Don't get hung up on that timestamp. Get hung up on the message that you are bringing people. And this is going to go back to what Courtney and I talked about in episode 84, and it's also going to go back to what I talked about a moment ago. You've got to give yourself credit for the knowledge that you've built up. And you have to realize that you have way more to say about the topic at hand than you're giving yourself credit for. Now, the scenario I laid out in episode 84, this was something that I did with a client that happened by accident, but I've been able to use it a couple more times with clients, in that they told me they didn't think they were going to have enough content to fill even 30 minutes of actual recording time. And that's when I told them, first, don't worry about the timestamp. It's arbitrary. You don't have to hit a specific mark to make this successful. Focus more on being yourself, getting comfortable on the microphone, and delivering a message that's going to impact your audience. Second of all, you want to make sure that as you're doing that, you have more in your mind than you realize. So even if you do go over, or even if you're a little bit under, it doesn't matter. As long as you've provided the message that your audience needs to hear, now you're in a good place. And that's going to make for content that people want to listen to, they want to watch, and ultimately they want to share with others. And that's what makes your podcast recommendable. So don't worry about this. And the exercise that I've done with my clients is let the podcast just roll. Now, I can't speak to what other producers do, but I know on my end, if I'm working with someone on actually building the content, there would never be a time when I would jump in and say, hold up, wait, you're at 45 minutes, you're at 50 minutes. It's time to start thinking about winding this down. No, let the conversation roll. Let things unfold naturally. For one, I can't speak for my clients, but I would feel if someone were to do that to me, it would just take me off my game. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not thinking about how I'm delivering a message. I'm thinking about the time. And who gives a shit about the time? Once everything is recorded, you can take that content and trim it down in post-production. You can make a decision to do 2 episodes and cut things in half. There's a number of different ways that you can play with that content, but now that you've got more to play with, it just gives you more of a message to deliver to your audience. But if you throw somebody off their game, or if you take yourself off your game worrying about the clock, then what the hell are we doing here? And this isn't the Stanley Cup Finals, and you're not down by a goal in Game 7. You don't have to worry about the clock here. Focus on the message that you're bringing your audience and let the clock click where it may. You know, that client that I talked about a moment ago, he was worried about half an hour's worth of content. And because I let things roll, he got over an hour on that first episode. And the reason why I let that go was so he could see that he knew more about his subject matter than he was giving himself credit for. But now we've got even more content to play with, and we can make the decision on what we want to do with it. If I would have cut him off, who knows what would have happened. But now he has the confidence to understand this is how I'm building this content, and I know way more than I was thinking I did. And now that content can be used in a number of different ways, or he can start to get a little bit more confident and comfortable in how he delivers it, so he does shorten the message if he wants to. It's really irrelevant with time. And I know that we've had that conversation on this show before. I've had that conversation a number of times with podcasters. In this world that we live in, it's very important to realize that the timestamps are arbitrary. Just focus on your message and being really good at delivering something that your audience wants to gobble up, and that's going to lead to some great things for your show. Okay, the third easy way to make sure that you never run out of content ideas. I'm stealing this from Courtney from episode 84 because I thought it was a great idea and it was one I never thought of. Write down as much as you possibly can about your subject matter. Now, as Courtney laid out on episode 84, when you do this, it's almost like through osmosis that this information is leaving your head and then coming right back, and it's making you realize that you know a lot about what you're talking about. Now, this can lead to a number of different podcast episode ideas, but it can also transcend podcasting, and it can make you even more confident in how you go about your day-to-day activities. Talking with your clients, talking with colleagues, talking with your team. Having full confidence around what you are talking about can make everything change. And if it takes a minute just to get it all out of your head and sort it out, that's an exercise worth performing. Because now you're putting yourself in a standpoint to where your podcast delivery is going to be at the highest levels of confidence. But sometimes, again, going back to what I've talked about previously here on this episode, if you aren't thinking on that level and you're more concerned about not having enough to talk about, thus putting a limiting belief in front of you, then that's going to stunt how you push your content out. And it might make you focus on the wrong things, like trying to hit an arbitrary timestamp. So if you've never done this exercise, or if you feel like maybe it's time for a refresher just to remind yourself, yeah, I really know my shit. Take 30 minutes and just write freely everything that you possibly can about your subject matter. Everything you can about what you'd want your podcast to be. If you had 30 minutes to sit with the most influential person in your industry, what would you want to relay to them? Write that down. And think about that as you're starting to develop new episodes for your podcast. Or if you're starting a new podcast from scratch, how can all of this knowledge be distilled into something that I can bring to my audience? So I highly recommend taking Courtney's advice. Write this stuff down. Get it out of your head. Organize it, sort it out, and then start to see little pieces of that can be a great topic for conversation on your show, whether you're doing it with a guest, whether you're doing it with a co-host, or you're just speaking solo. That exercise is big. And again, if you're at a point where you feel like maybe it's time to refresh yourself on what I know and what I can put together for my show and ultimately for my business, for my brand, this is an opportunity to get some ideas out of your head and get them down on paper. I would say if it hasn't already become apparent, if you haven't listened to episode 84, I'm going to provide a quick link in the show notes for this episode for you to go check it out, because you absolutely should. Courtney and I shared so much knowledge in that episode. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. But before you do, the fourth easy way to make sure that you never run out of content ideas, and this is an exercise that I've been doing for many years. Actually, I'm calling myself out on this because I have not been doing this since I rebranded Podcasting Strategy Simplified, but I'm reintroducing this into my life. Once a week, sit down and write down 3 episode ideas. Now, this exercise, it's contingent on how much content you're producing. If you're doing 1 episode a week, like most podcasters do, sitting down and writing down 3 episodes a week is going to have you way ahead of the game. If you're doing more than 1 episode a week, you may want to add a couple of that, maybe do 5 ideas a week. If you're doing a bi-weekly episode, maybe just do your exercise bi-weekly. But the point is that you always want to be thinking about new ideas for your podcast. And you always want to have a nice list of potential ideas to pull from. And what you're going to discover as you do this is that you're going to come up with some evergreen content ideas, but there might be something that you write down that's a little bit more topical. And let's say you've been doing this exercise for a month. You've got 12 ideas. If you do this consistently every week, you'll have 12 ideas listed. And maybe that 11th idea is something that just became a big deal in your industry. Okay, we're just going to slide that up to the top. We're going to talk about that now because by coincidence, I thought this would make great content, but now my industry is all over it. I want to have something that people are going to listen to right now. So there's a few things that I look at when I'm performing this exercise. I look at industry trends and innovations. If you go back in the earlier parts of Podcasting Strategy Simplified, when I was just in the rebranding phases of this show, a big topic of discussion was Apple bringing in the video technology. And that's still been a hot topic as more of the directory and host companies are getting on board. It's in effect now as we sit and talk. You can do this if you have this on Apple Podcasts, where you can go back and forth from video to audio. It was a hot topic that everyone was talking about, so I wanted to share my thoughts. So I did an episode on that. It wasn't originally in my lineup of these are the first episodes I want to do as I roll out this rebrand, but it was a hot topic, so I wanted to dive into that. So I'm always looking at trends, always looking at innovations, and I'm looking for something that could potentially impact you in a big way. If it's information that I feel is timely, I want to make sure that I get my thoughts and how you can apply it to your strategy in your hands as fast as I possibly can. I base a lot of these ideas off of existing content ideas. Like I said before, if I've developed a list of content, let's say my 3 episodes that I came up with this week are in place, but then I come at it next week and say, you know what? There's a spinoff on this episode that I can also do. And there's a spinoff of this one. And all of a sudden, maybe you develop a little 3-episode series. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with how you build that out. But looking at your existing content ideas is a great way to work smarter, not harder, right? Because now you don't have to go too deep into the mind to find something new. Just look at what you've already created and then pull those new ideas and put them together and see where they all fit in the lineup. So that's a great way to do this. And a third way that I'll always look at, my best performing episodes. What does your audience love? What are they telling you they love? And I don't necessarily gauge that on downloads. I base it on engagement. I base it on comments that I receive from people if I post it on social media, or if I'm talking to people if you drop an episode in a thread and somebody has something to say. If I'm getting more feedback about specific content, I want to double down on that. And that's a great way to look at the episodes. In addition, if you want to look at downloads, that's fine. I don't think that's the overall gauge for it, but I think retention rate is a great indicator of content that's succeeding for you and what you can continue to double down on. So if you look at an episode that only had maybe a 50% retention rate, meaning how far the average listener got into your episode, maybe that's something that you should shy away from. But maybe if you've got something, I have a couple episodes that have clocked in between 70% and 90%. And those are ones I say, okay, for future content ideas, I want to lean into these types of episodes because people that listen to my show are telling me they like it because they're staying longer. They're listening and watching for a longer period of time. That's huge. And I guarantee you, if you start creating a list of content to work off of and you put that exercise into play, you're never going to run out of content because your ratio is like 4-to-1. Every week you're putting out a new episode, but you're thinking of 3 new ideas. So you've got 12 new ideas hitting your list every month. You're only going to pull 4 from there. And you'll probably get to a point where you can say, I can take a couple weeks off. I've got more than enough content listed in my bank that I want to build that I don't need to come back to this week. Let me work through this list a little bit, then I'll start the exercise all over again. The bottom line is just like producing and then publishing your content, you need to be proactive in how you think of the ideas that you want to bring to life. These 4 exercises that I've laid out today, or these 4 strategies, are absolutely the easiest possible ways to ensure that you're always going to have content in the bank. And when you have content in the bank, that's going to keep you excited about building your podcast, and it's going to get you closer to the goal that you want your podcast to accomplish. And with that, I am going to bring the curtain down on episode 87 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. Until our paths cross again on the next episode, my name is Jason Sircone, reminding you that podcasting isn't easy, but it doesn't need to be complicated. I'll see you next time.